the left wants to pull down, and therefore often adopts an antagonistic attitude towards nearly all prior forms. The more extreme the current of the left, the more extreme becomes the destructive urge. There's even a spiritual dimension to this, in occultistic terms, whereby the left represents the destructive and chaotic side that wishes to arrange and extend a remit of chaos prior to the prospect of reconstruction. The idea that destructivism is a creative passion. There's an interesting story once about the anarchist Michael Bakunin, who was, if you like, the founder of the movement that lies to the left of Marxism, and was a rival to the attentions of the extreme left in the 19th century. Don't forget, extreme leftists would have tiny little meetings like this in the 19th century, totally ignored by the general culture, yet their ideas in the 20th century were to dominate much of the hinterland of the planet. Now Bakunin was, this is from E.H. Carr's biography of Bakunin, once passed a gang of rascals and ruffians who were destroying a house and were burning it to the ground. And he got out of the coach and joined in with the destruction and raced about. Don't forget he's an aristocrat. Raced about, putting his cane and ferule through things and stamping on pictures and throwing things out of windows with the other ruffians, who just accepted that he was one of them, that he just joined in. And when the conflagration had ensued and most of the mansion or whatever it was had gone up, Bakunin was asked why he'd done it, and he said because it's there. That's an ontological prerequisite, a very extreme left-wing attitude. You want to destroy things because they are there. The reason you want to do that isn't pure nihilism, because the back of it is the notion that there's a perfect society which can replace that which is destroyed. The reason why right-wing meetings are, in the past, when they have the numbers, ranked by the extreme left, and almost everyone over a certain age in this room has had experience of that, is because they see in their most radical opponents on the other side the germ, and more than the germ, of everything that they most dislike. They see the maximum form of essentialism. They may see the maximum form of the belief in the politics of identity, when they believe in the politics of non-identity. This means that people like Eliot, people like Pound, people like Lewis are anathema, and always have been, to the extreme left that took over much of the academy from the late 1960s. Although in many ways one is surprised that Pound and Eliot have not been demonised more. The reason that they haven't been, as I discussed in the Pound lecture last time, is because they're crucial to modernist poetics and the arts in the English language. If you took Pound and Eliot out and basically corralled them in a zone where Lewis is largely, but not exclusively, been left as politically incorrect, as essentialist, as quote-unquote racist, sexist, homophobic, non-philo-Semitic, inegalitarian, hierarchical, religious, prior metaphysical, and all these things which you're supposed not to be, you wouldn't have much left of Western poetics in the 20th century. That's why they survive, because they can't be taken out. All you can do is essentially throw brickbats at them. This society that we're now living in, under and in, is the hegemon of the liberal vision that has grown up over the last 2 centuries, in particular over the last 60 to 50 years. We're living in the eye of the storm. Almost all of the values that people in this room hold are inverted in relation to the mass society, and vice versa. This means that we're living through the eye of the tiger and the eye of the storm. Liberalism has never been more powerful in a left-liberal, secularised sense. Let's use the term liberalism as a shorthand for all sorts of other terms that could be used. We're now living in the apogee of the sort of ideas that used to meet secretly and semi-masonically at the beginning of the 20th century, when small little circles like the Bloomsbury Group, who used to meet in and around this area, Bloomsbury, the University District of London University, the Senate House just behind us, and so on. A lot of history in this area. These tiny little groups had to almost recognise each other with strange little handshakes and little nods, winks, and so on. You have to remember the pressure these people were under psychologically in the 1920s and the 1930s. Everything that they liked was detested by the mainstream. They were in favour of atheism, they were in favour of dehumanisation. They favoured it in a different way because mass immigration hadn't come about then, but they were in favour of various forms of multiculturalism as would have been defined in that era. They were in favour of homosexuality, they were in favour of the decline of the marriage bond, They're in favour of alternative lifestyles and relationships as a norm. They're in favour of drug usage and its privatisation, if you like, in terms of the moral space. They're in favour of all of the things which have come to pass, with the possible exception of euthanasia, absence of the death penalty, absence of military service, absence of an organic and collective and coherent vision of the society, a particular type of upper middle class power, maybe, in socio-economic terms, a form of radical Keynesianism dominating the social and economic space, which is complicated because all sorts of different groups would have aligned with that sort of idea. And although Keynes was a part of the Bloomsbury Group, that wasn't their original formulation. But we're living now in an era where all of those ideas are semi-totalitarian. Indeed, they're so pervasive that they're almost totalitarian. Eliot, Pound, Lewis and the others, the men of 1914, which is a long time back now, were living in the last gasp of the society that culturally came to an end in the 1950s. If Eliot dies in the mid-1960s and a stone is put up to him in Westminster Abbey 2 years after his death, we're living in a society which is the opposite polarity to that in which he and the others men of 14 grew up. There's a degree to which if somebody like Eliot, with some of the attitudes which he had, particularly Redmond of the earlier material, was alive now, he would receive no attention at all, or would be retrospectively completely demonised and would be regarded as a demonic influence.
In 1902 the Apostles elected a young Trinity undergraduate called Lytton Strachey. His father had been a general in India for 30 years, Kurtz's world, in fact, but his intellectual and moral formation was that of his mother, an agnostic stalwart of the women's progressive movement, and a free-thinking French Republican schoolmistress called Marie Silvestre. 2 years before being elected to the Apostles he had formed, with Leonard Woolf and Clive Bell, a midnight society which later devolved into the Bloomsbury Group. Both the Apostles and Bloomsbury, one secret and informal, the other informal and admitting a few women, revolved for the next 30 years round Strachey. Initially, however, he was not the philosopher of the sect. That was the role of G. E. Moore, a Trinity Don and fellow apostle whose major work, Principia Ethica, was published the autumn after Strachey's election. Its last 2 chapters, Ethics in Relation to Conduct and the Ideal, were, by implication, a frontal assault on their Judeo-Christian doctrine of personal accountability to an absolute moral code and the concept of public duty, substituting for it a non-responsible form of hedonism based on personal relationships. By far the most valuable things which we know or can imagine, Moore wrote, are certain states of consciousness which may be roughly described as the pleasures of human intercourse and the enjoyment of personal objects. No one, probably, who has asked himself the question, has ever doubted that personal affection and the appreciation of what is beautiful in art and nature are good in themselves. Strachey, who was a propagandist of genius rather than a creator, pounced on this discreet volume with the same enthusiasm Lenin showed for Hobson's Imperialism, published the year before. It was just the argument he wanted and could preach. To his fellow apostle Keynes he wrote urgently of the business of introducing the world to Moorism. The book was the ideology not of odious Victorian duty, but of friendship, and, as he confided to Keynes, with whom he was already competing for the affections of handsome young men, of a very special kind of friendship, we can't be content with telling their truth. We must tell the whole truth, and the whole truth is the devil. It's madness for us to dream of making digers understand that feelings are good, when we say in the same breath that the best ones are sodomitical. Our time will come about 100 years hence. Not only did friendship have higher claims than conventional morality, it was ethically superior to any wider loyalty. The point was to be made by Strachey's fellow apostle, E. M. Forster. If I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friend, I hope I should have the guts to betray my country. Moore's doctrine, outwardly so unpolitical, almost quietist, was in practice an excellent formula for an intellectual takeover. It provided ethical justification not merely for a society of mutual admirers, as the apostles had been in the past, but for the formation of a more positive and programmatic Freemasonry. A mafia almost.